Hatton Garden. To some, it was just another street in London, tucked away in the bustling borough of Camden. But to jewelers, brokers, and traders, Hatton Garden was the beating heart of Britain's diamond trade. A street where billions in gems and cash quietly flowed behind reinforced doors. The public saw polished shop fronts, men in tailored suits, women carrying velvet bags of jewels. But in the shadows, where the alleyways grew narrow and CCTV cameras blinked silently, another story was being written. In early 2015, a crew of unlikely criminals began circling this diamond district like hawks. They weren't young men hungry for quick riches. They were old. Gray hair, bad knees, pacemakers, dentures. On paper, they looked like grandfathers on pension checks. But beneath the wrinkles and arthritis were hardened professionals. Veterans of London's underworld with lifetimes of experience in thievery, burglary, and deception. The newspapers would later call them the bad grandpas. But behind the joking headlines lay something dead serious. This wasn't a ragtag group of old crooks fumbling with lockpicks. This was one of the most experienced crews ever assembled in Britain. They were planning a job so daring it would become legendary: to break into the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company and empty it of its treasures. The target. The Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Vault was legendary, a fortress of concrete and steel buried beneath the jewelry district. Its walls were 2 feet thick, reinforced with metal, and guarded by alarms linked to private security. Hundreds of deposit boxes lined its chambers, holding not just cash and diamonds, but heirlooms, family fortunes, and untraceable assets for the wealthy elite. To the right crew, it was the ultimate score. Reconnaissance began months before. The men spent days wandering Hatton Garden, disguised as workmen, delivery drivers, even tourists. They studied the rhythms: when couriers came, when guards checked doors, when cleaners worked. They learned that Easter weekend would leave the building nearly deserted. With London away on holiday, time would be on their side. Every lock, every camera, every sensor was cataloged. The crew drew maps, sketched blueprints, tested tools. If something didn't work, they refined it. If an alarm couldn't be bypassed, they found a workaround. This was not improvisation. This was orchestration. The crew. Each man brought a lifetime of crime with him, and each one carried a past that explained why this heist mattered so much. Brian Reeder, the mastermind. At 76 years old, Reeder was the oldest of the gang. A career burglar with a reputation dating back to the Great Train Robbery era. He had been in and out of prison his entire life. He was calm, calculating, and carried himself like an elder statesman of crime. He wasn't there to prove himself. He was there to cement a legacy. Terry Perkins, the patient planner. Perkins was 67, a diabetic who carried his medication with him even on jobs. He had spent decades in prison for armed robbery, but remained sharp as ever. Perkins was meticulous, obsessive about detail, and carried a cold, clinical presence. He approached burglary like a surgeon approaches an operation. John Kenny Collins, the wheelman. At 74, Collins was the driver. He knew London's roads like the back of his hand, and his specialty was logistics. How to get in, how to get out, where to dump vehicles, how to avoid police cameras. Collins was paranoid, but dependable, a man who could smell surveillance a mile away. Danny Jones, the burglar. At 58, Jones was the youngest of the main crew, but still far from youthful. He was brash, cocky, and fancied himself a master burglar. A career criminal with a flair for bravado, he thrived on the adrenaline of the job. Jones was the type who'd make jokes while drilling into a vault, masking nerves with arrogance. Carl Wood, the muscle. In his late 50s, Carl had the strength and hands-on ability to haul heavy gear, carry safes, and move loot. He wasn't the brains of the operation, but he was reliable when muscle was needed. The mystery associate, Basil. His real identity remained concealed for years. Known only as Basil, this shadowy figure was the key to the entire job. Younger than the others, mid-50s, skilled in electronics and security systems. Basil had inside knowledge of the vault's alarm system, and without him, the crew wouldn't stand a chance. To this day, Basil remains the most mysterious figure of the Hatton Garden Heist. The stakes. For these men, this wasn't just about money. It was about defying time itself. They had grown old in a world where their kind was disappearing. Modern criminals used keyboards, not crowbars. The streets had changed. Technology had made burglary nearly impossible. Yet here they were, veterans of the old school, daring to prove that their methods still worked. The haul they envisioned was staggering. Early estimates suggested there could be £200 million in diamonds, gold, cash, and jewelry locked away in that vault. Even a fraction of that would make each man rich beyond imagination. But it wasn't just greed, it was ego. To pull off one of the largest heists in British history, at their age, under the nose of modern security, this would be their masterpiece, their legacy. The countdown. As Easter 2015 approached, the tension among the crew grew thicker. They met in pubs, back rooms, and nondescript flats, talking in hushed tones. Tools were tested, heavy-duty Hilti drills, industrial cutting gear, ropes and scaffolding. Vehicles were swapped, license plates changed, disguises prepared. Every man rehearsed his role. Reeder would oversee. Perkins would handle planning details. Jones and Wood would drill. Collins would manage the transport. Basil would deal with the alarms. The city moved on in its usual rhythm, unaware. Commuters spilled out of trains, businessmen bought diamonds, tourists wandered the streets. And in the minds of 6 aging criminals, the perfect storm was gathering. They were ready. The walls of the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Company were about to be tested by men who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove.
The plan was set, and now the crew moved into the most dangerous stage of any job, preparation. Talk was one thing, but action left footprints, and footprints led to prison. Every man in the gang knew that. Still, they pushed forward with the determination of veterans who had lived their whole lives by taking risks. The first problem was tools. Hatton Garden wasn't just another jewelry shop or a high-street bank. It was a fortress buried under concrete, reinforced with steel, designed to resist burglars, bombs, and fire. Getting inside would take more than crowbars and hammers. They needed industrial firepower. Drills, grinders, ropes, scaffolding, each piece chosen with care. The centerpiece was the Hilti drill, a massive diamond-tipped machine meant for construction sites, not burglaries. It was heavy, awkward, and deafening, but powerful enough to chew through the vault wall if handled correctly. Alongside it came angle grinders to slice through metal plating, bolt cutters for locks, crowbars for leverage. Every tool was bought with cash, sometimes through contacts, sometimes through unsuspecting middlemen. Nothing was ordered online, nothing left a receipt that could be traced back. The old men tested their machines in quiet garages, sparks spitting into the dark. They rehearsed lifting the drill, maneuvering it in tight spaces, checking how long it could run before overheating. They weren't young anymore. and every hour of practice reminded them of that. Arms shook, backs ached, and sweat poured, but none of them complained. For one last score, they would endure it. Meanwhile, the planning on the ground never stopped. Danny Jones and Carl Wood walked Hatton Garden for weeks, blending in as construction workers, shoppers, or repairmen. They studied the routines of the street, the guards making their rounds, the delivery vans pulling up, the workers locking the doors. They memorized the moments when the area grew still, when the city's constant noise dipped just enough to cover the sound of drilling. The conclusion was clear. Easter weekend was their chance. The bank would close Thursday night and remain shut until Tuesday morning. 4 whole days where no one would be inside, no alarms would be reset, no staff would stumble upon them. It was the perfect window. John Kenny Collins became the navigator. He mapped every alley, every side street, every possible entry and escape. He parked in different spots each time, studying which curbs drew attention and which ones seemed invisible. He watched the rhythm of police patrols, how long it took them to circle back, how often they slowed near the vault. He traced multiple getaway routes across London, rehearsing in his head what he would do if everything went wrong and blue lights flooded the street. To the others, Collins was more than the driver. They were their lifeline. But even the best drivers and the strongest drills meant nothing against the alarms. The vault had a guardian, and if that system triggered, no amount of planning would save them. That was where Basil came in. Younger, sharper, and far more mysterious than the rest of the crew, Basil carried himself like someone who knew exactly what he was doing and never said more than he had to. He wasn't a chatterer like Jones, nor did he have the gruff swagger of Perkins. He moved quietly, carefully, with the confidence of someone who understood wires and circuits in a way the others never could. The gang never spoke openly about where Basil came from, and later investigators would argue endlessly over who he really was. Some claimed he had inside connections to the vault, maybe even worked for the company that maintained the alarms. Others insisted he was simply that skilled, a technician who had studied security systems for years and knew how to turn them off without leaving a trace. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Without Basil, there was no job. He would silence the alarm, and the others would do the rest. Piece by piece, the plan came together. Basil would lead them inside through the rear of the building, down an elevator shaft where they could lower their tools and slip in unseen. Once at the back wall of the vault, the Hilti drill would do its work, grinding a hole wide enough for a man to crawl through. Inside, the deposit boxes would be waiting, packed with jewelry, cash, gold and diamonds from London's Diamond District. They wouldn't be able to take it all, but even a fraction could set them up for life. In the weeks before Easter, tension ran through the crew like an electric current. Danny Jones bragged about how easy it would be, Perkins snapped at him to keep his mouth shut, and Collins urged caution at every turn. Jones and Wood were the muscle, Perkins especially, his temper always ready to flare. Collins was the cautious one, reminding them they weren't boys anymore, that one slip would send them to prison for the rest of their lives. And Basil kept quiet, working in shadows, checking circuits and layouts, and vanishing just as quickly as he appeared. Every man knew his role, every man knew the risks, and as Easter weekend drew closer, London moved on as usual, unaware that beneath its streets, a crew of aging criminals was preparing to carry out what would soon be called the crime of the century.
Easter weekend arrived, and with it, silence. London slowed to a crawl. Shops closed early, offices locked their doors, and the streets emptied. Families gathered at home, churches filled with worshippers, and somewhere below the city, a crew of old men prepared to do the unthinkable. On the night of April 2nd, 2015, they gathered their equipment, heavy bags filled with drills, crowbars, ropes, and grinders. The Hilti drill alone weighed nearly as much as one of them, but they hauled it all the same. Disguises were minimal: construction clothes, hats pulled low, gloves to keep fingerprints off the metal. Nothing flashy, nothing to draw eyes. They were shadows among the empty streets. Collins parked the van near Hatton Garden, scanning the mirrors again and again, making sure no one had followed. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face stayed still, the calm of a man who'd done this dance 100 times before. One by one, the others slipped out, blending with the darkness, their bags cutting into their shoulders. They moved toward the building that held the vault, not through the front like paying customers, but from the back, where a narrow alley swallowed them into silence. At the rear entrance, Basil stepped forward. This was his moment. While the others waited, he crouched by the door, hands working quickly, delicately, with tools most of the others couldn't name. To them, it looked like magic. Tiny clicks in the darkness, the sound of tumblers giving way, wires being coaxed into silence. Minutes passed like hours. Then with a quiet shift, the barrier opened. They slipped inside. The building swallowed them in darkness, a narrow staircase and an elevator shaft waiting to be their passage. One by one, they lowered bags of equipment down the shaft, ropes reeling softly against the metal. Their boots echoed faintly as they climbed into the belly of the building, hearts thudding in rhythm with every step. At the bottom, they reached the back wall of the vault, a fortress of reinforced concrete and steel designed to keep out armies. Danny Jones wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned in the dim light. "Piece of cake," he muttered, the kind of cocky bravado that annoyed Perkins instantly. "Shut it," Perkins growled. This wasn't the time for jokes. This was the moment everything balanced on a knife's edge. The Hilti drill was lowered into place. It roared to life with a deafening howl, echoing through the underground chamber. Sparks flew as the diamond-tipped bit chewed into concrete. The vibration rattled their bones, dust filling their air, choking their lungs. They took turns holding it steady, muscles straining, sweat dripping, the machine threatening to rip itself free from their hands. Hour after hour they worked, grinding deeper, the smell of burning stone filling the space. Finally, the wall gave way, a jagged hole just wide enough for a man to crawl through. The vault waited on the other side, dark and silent, a dragon's cave of treasure untouched for decades. Jones was the first to slip through, wriggling like a child through a tunnel, his laughter echoing when he landed inside. Perkins followed, grumbling, his knees aching as he squeezed through. One by one, the others entered, their eyes widening as they stood before rows of deposit boxes, stacked floor to ceiling, each one filled with the secrets of London's wealthy elite. Jewelry, diamonds, cash, gold, fortunes hidden away, never meant to see daylight again. They wasted no time. Hammers smashed into boxes, crowbars pried open locks, metal bent and splintered under their assault. The sound was deafening, the rhythm of steel breaking against steel, the clatter of boxes hitting the floor. Inside, velvet pouches spilled diamonds across the ground, cash bundles thudded onto the concrete, gold chains tangled like vines. They shoveled it all into bags, their hearts racing, their bodies trembling with greed and adrenaline. Hours passed, but they didn't stop. The pile grew higher, the bags heavier, until sweat soaked their clothes and their hands ached from swinging tools. At one point, Perkins stood over a half-open box filled with glittering stones and muttered, "Enough to feed us all for 10 lifetimes." But still they kept going, driven by the hunger that had carried them through every job of their lives. When the bags could hold no more, they dragged them back through the hole, heaving them up the elevator shaft with ropes, each man straining, grunting, cursing under his breath.
The van waited above, and with every load they hauled, they were one step closer to walking away with millions. By dawn, they had done the impossible. The vault had been breached, its treasures looted by a crew of aging criminals who refused to fade quietly. London remained asleep, unaware of the storm that had just torn through its heart. But even as they packed up the last of the loot, something gnawed at the edges of their victory. They weren't finished. Not yet. The haul was massive, but the vault still held more. And in the minds of men who had built their lives on greed and risk, leaving treasure behind was unthinkable. The decision was made. They would come back for a second night. What began as triumph was already sliding toward disaster. The roar of the Hilti drill echoed like thunder in the vault chamber, bouncing off concrete and steel, rattling through the pipes above their heads. To anyone passing outside, the city seemed dead quiet, a holiday night with nothing stirring. But below ground, it was a different world. Dust swirled in thick clouds, coating their throats until every cough felt like it might give them away. The drill screamed again, a banshee wail in the bowels of Hatton Garden. Perkins barked orders between gasps of breath. He was the general down there, even if the others resented him for it. "Shut it, keep it steady, don't let the bit jump," he snapped at Collins, whose hands were trembling from the strain. Collins wasn't the strongest anymore, but he refused to admit it. His arms shook as the heavy machine bucked against the wall, and sweat poured down his face, cutting rivers through the gray dust clinging to his skin. Jones stood back, hands on his hips, grinning through the grime. "Bloody hell, listen to it sing!" he shouted, his voice half lost under the machine's howl. His eyes gleamed with the thrill of it, the way only a true thief could admire the beauty of destruction. Perkins shot him a glare, but Jones only shrugged. To him, this wasn't just about money. It was about the rush, the beating heart of the job. Basil stayed quiet, working in the shadows, his eyes darting across the walls, his ears tuned to the hum of alarms that weren't there. He didn't trust luck, not here. Every sound above, pipes groaning, dust shifting, made him freeze for half a breath. The others noticed, but they let him be. Basil's paranoia had saved them more than once. Hours passed. The drill chewed through feet of concrete, then the thick steel lining beneath. Sparks spat out, burning tiny holes into their overalls. The smell of hot metal mixed with concrete dust until the air grew heavy and acrid, choking them. They pulled their shirts over their mouths, coughing, spitting grit onto the floor. Their ears rang so loud from the noise that silence seemed impossible to imagine. At one point, Collins slumped against the wall, chest heaving and hands raw from gripping the vibrating monster. "I can't bloody feel my arms," he muttered, his voice trembling. Perkins didn't even look at him. "No one cares. Keep at it." The words were sharp, merciless, but that was how he ran things. Weakness, hesitation, those could get you caught. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bit punched through. A rush of stale, untouched air hissed out from the other side of the wall. The crew froze, their ears ringing, their lungs straining. Jones crouched down, brushing away fragments of steel with his gloved hands, his eyes wide. "We're in," he whispered, as if the vault itself might be listening. The hole wasn't large enough yet, not by a long shot. For another hour they widened it, sweat soaking their clothes until their bodies felt hollowed out. Then Jones wriggled through first, his boots disappearing into the dark hole like a rabbit diving into its burrow. On the other side, his voice echoed faintly, "Jesus Christ, it's beautiful!" One by one they followed. Basil slid in silently. Perkins cursed as his shoulders scraped the jagged concrete. Collins grunted, struggling to pull his belly through, the others yanking him from the far side. And then, for the first time, they stood inside the vault. It was colder here, the air still and heavy.
Fluorescent strips hummed faintly above, casting the rows of deposit boxes in a pale glow. Hundreds of them, stacked neatly in lines, each box locked tight, each box a secret. For a long moment, no one moved. They just stared, breathing hard, their pupils widening as their eyes drank it all in. This wasn't just a room. It was a temple, a shrine built to greed and secrecy, and they had broken into the sanctum.
Then the spell broke. Jones slammed the first crowbar into a box. The clang echoed like a gunshot, and adrenaline surged back into their veins. The metal bent with a groan, then gave way. Inside, velvet pouches spilled jewels that glittered like stars. He grabbed a fistful, laughing, stuffing them into a sack. "We're rich," he breathed, almost in awe. The others moved fast. Crowbars pried, hammers pounded, boxes clattered to the floor in showers of sparks. Basil worked quieter than the rest, using tools instead of brute force, but even he couldn't resist the urgency. Perkins moved methodically, each strike fueled by decades of frustration, his face twisted in grim determination. Collins, though slower, still found his rhythm, muttering to himself as he pulled cash bundles wrapped in elastic from the wreckage. The floor turned into chaos, diamonds scattering like marbles, stacks of notes spilling across the dust, gold bracelets snaking through the debris. Their bags filled quickly, weighed down until their shoulders screamed. Yet the more they pulled out, the more the vault seemed endless, as though the wealth could never truly be emptied. Somewhere in that frenzy, time vanished. Minutes bled into hours, and soon it was the dead of night, long past the hour when normal men slept. But these weren't normal men. They were wolves who had smelled blood, and nothing could pull them away. When the first bags were finally dragged back through the hole, the exhaustion hit them like a wall. Ropes burned their palms raw as they heaved the sacks up the elevator shaft, their muscles straining until they thought their arms might rip free. But one by one, the bags rose, swallowed into the van above. By the time they staggered back into the alley, the city was still asleep, the sky just beginning to pale with the first hint of dawn. They were drenched in sweat, covered in dust, their clothes stiff with grime. Yet each of them felt the fire still burning. They had done it. They had stolen what no one believed possible. And yet, as they sat in the van surrounded by millions, silence hung heavy. Because every man there knew the same truth. The vault was not empty. They had left behind boxes, unopened, untouched, waiting. And greed is a disease that never sleeps. It was Collins who broke the silence. "We go back," he said flatly. Not a question, a statement, a decision already made. Perkins scowled but didn't argue. Jones's grin returned, wide and reckless. Even Basil, quiet and cautious, didn't protest. They all knew it. They weren't finished. The first night of Hatton Garden was over, but the heist itself had only just begun. The next night, the streets of London seemed almost hesitant to awaken. Easter Sunday had passed, leaving an eerie stillness that blanketed Hatton Garden. The city was unaware that below, the crew returned to finish what they had started. They arrived cautiously, equipment in tow, muscles stiff and sore from the night before. Every man felt the weight of the previous hours pressing on him, not just physically, but mentally. The thrill had returned, but so had a subtle, gnawing anxiety. They descended into the building, quiet as shadows, their breathing measured. Basil led the way, checking the entrance and the wiring as meticulously as a surgeon inspecting a patient before a critical operation. The elevator shaft welcomed them like an old friend, but there was no comfort here, only the knowledge that one slip, one stray sound, could bring the police crashing down. Once at the back wall of the vault, the Hilti drill roared again, hungry and unyielding. Sparks flew, dust billowed, and the vibrations rattled through their bones. The crew worked in unison,
a practiced machine honed by desperation and experience. Collins grunted as he held the drill steady, his back protesting every movement. Perkins cursed beneath his breath as he guided it deeper into the steel, and Jones, ever the reckless one, leaned in too close, squinting at the faint shimmer of the box seams beyond the wall. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Time seemed suspended, measured only by the rhythm of the drill and the muffled clatter of boxes being pried open on the other side. Every creak of metal made their hearts jump. Every puff of dust in the dim light was a reminder of their mortality. They were men walking a knife edge, balancing greed and survival in the same motion. Inside, the vault yielded its secrets reluctantly. Cash bundles were wrapped tighter than any man could hope to count in one night. Jewelry glinted from velvet cushions, diamonds scattering light like shards of the moon. Gold chains tangled over boxes, coins spilling like rivers of liquid metal. The crew moved tirelessly, the physical effort matched only by the mental strain of keeping track of what had been taken and what remained. Tension crept in between them as fatigue set in. Perkins snapped at Jones for dropping a bag of coins. Collins argued quietly with Basil over how long to pause before lifting another sack. The older men were exhausted, but the youngest, Basil, seemed untouchable, calm, precise, never rushing, never faltering. He moved through the chaos like a shadow, making every action count. By the early hours of the morning, they had emptied a significant portion of the vault. Their bags were heavy, bulging with riches beyond most men's imagination. Yet, as they paused to catch their breath, the quiet whispered a dangerous truth. There was still more. The allure of unopened boxes, untouched gold, and hidden cash pulled at them like a magnet. The decision was unanimous. They would take just a little longer, one final sweep before vanishing into the night. The final hour was a frenzy. Tools flew, hammers struck metal, and boxes gave way with squeals and groans. Dust coated every surface, every hand, every sleeve. Sweat stung their eyes, and their muscles screamed for relief, but adrenaline drowned it all out. They were no longer a gang of old men. They were predators in their element, driven by greed, experience, and the intoxicating taste of power. Finally, when the last safe deposit box was pried open, the crew dragged the final bags through the hole in the wall. Each step up the elevator shaft was a battle against exhaustion, but also a careful dance to avoid noise. Once outside, they loaded the van, double-checked their route, and melted into the streets. London, still sleeping under the soft light of dawn, remained oblivious to the disaster that had just unfolded below its surface. For the first time, they allowed themselves to exhale. The job was done. Millions of pounds in cash, jewelry, and gold had been taken. No alarms had been triggered, no guards had been harmed, no one had been caught. It was a triumph, the culmination of meticulous planning, precise execution, and nerves of steel. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, each man knew this victory carried weight beyond the money. The risks they had taken, the precision required, the sheer audacity of their actions. It was a story that would echo long after the streets returned to normal. They had struck at the heart of London's wealth, unchallenged, unstoppable, and in doing so, carved their names into the annals of criminal history. The Hatton Garden Heist was complete.
The morning after the second night, London woke to business as usual. Shops opened, commuters streamed through streets, and the city hummed with its familiar rhythm. Yet below the surface, a crime of unprecedented scale had taken place. Hatton Garden, a fortress of wealth, had been stripped bare, and no one knew who had done it or how. Inside the police station, the first reports trickled in. Guards and staff were shocked, but unaware of the magnitude. Alarm logs were checked, and CCTV footage scrutinized, but there were gaps, blanks in the recordings, cameras pointing the wrong way, shadows where there should have been clarity. The sheer audacity of the heist left investigators reeling. How could men penetrate a reinforced vault, disable alarms, and vanish without leaving a trace? Detectives descended on the scene with caution and disbelief. They measured the hole in the vault wall, took photographs of the scattered debris, and began cataloging the missing items. Every box that had been pried open, every bundle of cash lifted, every scattered diamond told a story, yet the story was incomplete. Names were checked, fingerprints dusted, and every lead was pursued, but the trail was faint, almost non-existent. Meanwhile, the crew dispersed, blending back into everyday life as if nothing had happened. Collins and Jones returned to their routines, old habits masking the adrenaline still pulsing in their veins. Perkins counted his share meticulously, dividing stacks of cash into envelopes, ensuring that every piece of the haul was accounted for. Basil remained elusive, disappearing into the city, a ghost who had orchestrated the silence of alarms and the precision of entry. Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Neighbors reported strange vans parked nearby, odd activity in alleys, and the occasional glimpse of men carrying heavy bags. Yet no one connected the dots. The press, hungry for sensational stories, called it a mystery heist. But the reality was even more astonishing. The thieves had struck with military precision, exploiting weaknesses in the system that no one had thought to defend. As investigators pieced together the events, a picture began to emerge. The crew's age was surprising. They were older, experienced men, some with decades of criminal history, yet their methods were methodical and deliberate. They knew the building, the streets, and the patterns of London's security better than anyone inside the vault. And Basil, whose role remained mysterious to the authorities, had ensured that no alarm sounded and no motion detector betrayed their presence. Public fascination grew. Newspapers ran stories about the great Hatton Garden Heist, painting the men as a mix of villains and folk heroes. Every detail uncovered, how they used the elevator shaft, how they drilled through concrete, how they handled the loot, captured imaginations. The scale of the crime, the audacity, the precision, it became a legend even before arrests were made. Eventually, cracks appeared. Investigators found overlooked evidence. A discarded tool, a fingerprint, a neighbor's vague memory of movement. Slowly, the net began to close. Arrests followed. Jones, Collins, Perkins, and the others were taken in one by one. They faced questioning, interrogations that lasted hours, and the cold, meticulous logic of the law. The planning that had been their greatest weapon now became their undoing. Each testimony, each small mistake, unraveling the story of the heist in detail. The crew's sentences reflected the scale of their crime. Years in prison, fines, and the return of some, but not all, of the stolen goods. Basil, the elusive technician, disappeared from the public record, a figure of speculation, his fate as mysterious as his role in the operation. Hatton Garden itself was rebuilt, reinforced further, a reminder that even the cleverest plans eventually meet the weight of justice. Yet for the public, the legend lived on. It was a story of audacity, skill, and the irresistible pull of greed. A heist executed by men who were meticulous, bold, and unrelenting. A crime that became a benchmark, a measure of what human cunning and courage, illegal though it may be, could achieve. In the end, The Hatton Garden Heist was more than just theft. It was a masterclass in planning, patience, and execution. A testament to human daring and a chilling reminder that even the oldest and most cautious of systems can be undone by those who understand them best. The streets of London returned to normal, but the story of what happened in those quiet Easter nights would never be forgotten.
If you enjoyed today's video, we thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rare Breed Chronicles. And let's dive into another story that defies the ordinary.